So here we are. This is the last lecture. We're going to cover a third part of Chapter 4. The last class, I think I'll just take questions. I don't think I'm going to add any more material. Hello, Elizabeth. And so let's take a look at this 4C stuff, which is here. Information Security Program Development. All right. So we'll do policy development, and most of it is going to be third-party risk management and related activities. And these other topics are not going to be covered in this semester. So, when developing your policy, the security policy is foundational. In broad terms, it explains your principles and required actions intended to go to all the personnel, everybody, including temporary workers and contractors and consultants. I just had to finish a bunch of compliance training as a consultant at some of my clients for this sort of thing. So this policy has to be easily accessible. Everybody has to be aware of it so they can't claim they didn't know about it. You have to acknowledge the understanding. I had to do a bunch of that and annual training to make sure everybody is up to date on these policies. All right, so you have to consider the laws, of course, governing your industry, the risk tolerance of your company, what controls you have, and your culture in determining what to put in that policy. And so you align it with your controls, making sure that your controls don't contradict the policy, and make sure that it can be understood. It's not overly technical. You may have a separate policy for technical workers with technical details. So you've got acceptable use of assets like company computers and the website and such. How you handle mobile devices. Is it okay for people to use personal devices? Protecting things, passwords, personally owned devices. How to handle incidents. Very important that people know what to do if they discover something wrong. Email and so on. Social media. Workplace safety, visitors. The consequences of noncompliance. Cloud computing. And sending data to third parties. These are all things you have to cover. And so you distribute this thing. Everybody has to comply with the policy, and your executives shouldn't be breaching it. You know, in the UK, there's been a huge turmoil because they passed strict COVID regulations for the whole nation, and then the Prime Minister and his staff just had parties in blatant violation of it. And when they came out, everybody got very upset, saying, "Why do you have one rule for us and another rule for you?" The governor of California and the mayor of San Francisco also did the same thing, and didn't get quite as much blowback, although a bunch of people were offended. Because nobody actually enforced anybody to obey the regulations over here the way they did in Britain, I think. All right, and then there's third-party risk management. This is a huge issue these days. People are outsourcing lots of their work and putting a lot of it in the cloud. Yes, exactly. Rules for me, but not for thee. But this is a huge issue these days. A lot of people are outsourcing programming, even outsourcing security, and if they aren't doing that, they're almost certainly using Amazon Cloud or Azure or other cloud services, and those cloud services are third-party companies handling your company data. So now this is the fundamental principle. You can outsource work, but you cannot outsource responsibility. Kaiser Health, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, got an email saying from somebody in Pakistan saying, "If you don't pay me my $50, I'm going to dump your medical records on the internet." And they said, "We don't hire anybody in Pakistan. What is this nonsense?" And she said, "Just to prove it, I'm including some records of the data." I said, "This is our data." They said, "What is our data doing in Pakistan?" It turned out they hired a company to do data entry, and the company, without telling Kaiser, outsourced it and sent it to Pakistan, promising to pay these people like $1 a day, and then they didn't even pay them their $1 a day. So if you outsource part of your work to somebody else, and they do something stupid, you are liable for it. You say, well, you didn't pay your own staff to do it, you outsourced it, and then you did not review and control what they did, so you gave the data to some idiot, and they did something bad with it. It's your fault. It was your responsibility to protect that data, and that includes not handing the data to some subcontractor who will do something awful with it. It is your duty to have a contract with the subcontractor and audit them and check their reputation and things like that, or you are liable for having basically done a bad thing with the data. So that's the problem. And this happens to a lot of people. that outsourced to other companies, other countries. They found out that awful things were happening in other countries. There was a British TV show showing people outsourced telephone operators to India. They would just have people answering the phone, and they would just be writing down the credit card numbers, and then they would walk off work and sell the credit card numbers to a thief because they wouldn't get caught. And it's a problem. So now there are benefits from using third parties. You might be able to get somebody with more skill than you do. Like, for example, when you get hacked, people hire Mandiant. Mandiant has highly skilled incident response people, and they're probably better than your own staff. How about including as part of the contract that they cannot outsource without our knowledge? Yes, that would be quite reasonable. Also, compliance standards, that's ways. So then you of course, you can subcontract to a company like Google Azure Cloud, where they're running thousands of company servers, so it's cheaper because of economy of scale. Also, sometimes you want objectivity, particularly if you're being audited. If you have an internal audit, but your internal staff will often not see their own mistakes, you need an external audit to be objective. And of course, the main thing is you outsource things to make it cheaper. But there are risks. The cost might be more than you think. They might do a bad job. You don't really know if the employees have been screened, and so on. You risk that they might do a bad job in various ways and get you in trouble. They might mess up. And if something does go wrong, it's hard for you to investigate. You don't have access to their servers, their logs, their company records, especially if you went across a national boundary and they're in another country. You probably can't even sue them or anything. So, and also, it's bad for morale. Obviously, when you start outsourcing your stuff, all your company employees say they're going to fire all of us and outsource our part of the company too, probably. The better companies used foreign call centers where they didn't allow staff to have pens or pencils. Yeah, that may be. Sure. Sure there are various attempts to control this. Anyway, so you may have trouble when it comes to being audited and compliant, depending on how you outsourced. And cross-border data transfer and time zone differences and language and cultural differences are all more barriers that will lead to unexpected costs and problems. So you identify your So if you go to a company and you're trying to figure out what's going on, the first thing is list all your third-party vendors. Consult with all your stakeholders. All these parts of your company might be outsourcing some of their work. Legal, procurement, facilities, people in various locations. There's an issue called VM sprawl and cloud sprawl or something like that, where random parts of your company will just put things on cloud services without even telling higher management. So you might not even know all the cloud services you're using or what they're being used for. So there are ways to identify this. You look for data connections. Just look at your network connections, see if they're going to cloud services, your firewall rules, connections to identity and access management systems. There are cloud access security broker systems just here to control the network connections you make to cloud services, a sort of special software firewall kind of thing to control what happens, and that's considered a good security product to have. And there are third-party applications just to manage your relationship with third parties, special applications just for this purpose, like from RSA and other companies. All right. So now here's a problem. You can't perform strict due diligence on all vendors. It wouldn't be efficient. So what you have to do, just like everything else we've talked about, is you'd have to decide the level of risk. So consider how much sensitive customer data they have, how critical they are to your operations, what kind of access they might have to your buildings and such, and then you rate them, high, medium, low risk. The low risk ones, maybe you don't need to bother because if they don't have any access to your physical buildings, then that's a low risk. If they don't have very many records of your data, that's a low risk. If they have more access or data, that's a higher risk. And so you can decide how strictly to audit them and how much to worry about it based on how much of your business they have to risk. So let's take a look at a Kahoot. And something funny has happened here. There we are. This is 160 for C1. change the music. Good. Yep, same melody, but imagined or something. Yeah. All right, looks like we only got 4 competitors, but that's a little better than having just 3. All right. At least there's a bit of competition. All right, so which benefit is especially important for auditors? Yep, objectivity is what auditors have. All right. And if you get PCI DSS, you're required to get external audits by external auditors. All right. What risk comes from outsourcing a department and might affect other departments? Yeah, that's the main one. These other things might happen, but the thing that's most likely is lowered employee morale as they figure out that you're starting to outsource things. All right, what lowers third-party risk? Yeah, the Cloud Access Security Broker is the special system to lower the risk of unauthorized cloud access. At least that's my understanding of what it does. I've never really used one. Anyway. All right, so what vendors should be subjected to thorough due diligence? Yeah, the ones handling sensitive data, that's what matters. These other things are secondary considerations. All right, which stakeholder often has third-party relationships that do not access IT systems? Yeah, this is facilities. I remember one of the physical pen testers at the con said, if you want to just get into a building, all you have to do is get a broom and a mop and a bucket, and people will just let you walk right past them and go anywhere. So cleaning staff, repair staff, and such are often just not paid a lot of attention to. All right? I think that's Judy. All right. All right. So if you want to determine whether your third party is doing good work, you can just give them questionnaires, for example, and ask them if they're doing things. And that's what PCI DSS does if you don't handle very many transactions. Or you can ask for a little more by requiring them to submit evidence, proof of what they say. Or you can move up to visiting the site, or have external attestation where they show that they are compliant with a normal standard like SOC 2 or ISO 27001, something like that. That would be another way to reassure your company that they are meeting certain standards of performance there. You can go to third-party business intelligence companies like LexisNexis that will rate, the reputation of a company. You can try to determine things from the outside, like security scans and dark web monitoring. There's external cyber intelligence companies like Recorded Future that will tell you if their data has been leaked, if they've been hacked recently, and things like that. You can look at pen tests. You can even do intrusive monitoring. Some people even allow other companies to come in and inspect their event logs and firewall logs and such. You might be able to establish that kind of close relationship with them so you can see what's going on in their network. And so then you'd have various assessment activities. Your highest risk, if you're going to give them a questionnaire, it might be the longest. You might decide to do site visits on the high and medium, but not the low risk, and external attestations and so on. These intrusive monitoring, it'd be much more rare. And so on. High risk. All right, looks like that's duplicative. All right. Assessment frequency. Okay, how often you do it. Maybe you don't do it at all for the low-risk companies, but you do it annually or even quarterly, these sort of things. And if you wanted to do this intrusive monitoring, you could even do it continuously, where you're just constantly connected to them and you connect their systems to your SIEM or something, so you're constantly aware of whether they're getting hacked. At that point, it seems like they're practically inside your company, but they could be technically outside, but just in a very close partnership. All right. So to remediate issues, when bad things happen, this is a problem. Often your only control over your third-party service is that you can quit paying them money, and you can try to ruin their reputation by publishing that they did something rotten. And that's not a really strong control over them. So that's a problem, especially if you're crossing national boundaries. If you're outsourcing out of the country, then you may really have almost nothing you can do to limit what harm they do or to discourage them from doing bad things. Now, you can have a contract with a service level agreement specifying that they must, do lots of things, do quality work, have proper security controls, and so on, and respect your intellectual property. But you'd have to consult with your legal team to determine whether you really have much recourse if they don't live up to that contract. Laws, warranty, dispute and resolution rules, and so on. So if the questionnaire comes back and you don't like the answers, and this I think is very interesting. This is an example from your book. What if they don't change their passwords every 90 days? I'm having to do that on some of my corporate jobs. And the point is that was a terrible idea. 20 years ago or so, the U.S. government had the standard saying you should change your passwords every 90 days. And people did research and proved that that is a terrible idea. That lowers your security. It does not improve it. It doesn't stop any known threat. It just irritates your people and makes them choose bad passwords. And everybody does it. And almost everybody believes it's important and enforces it, including some of my clients, including your textbook. And it has been resoundingly retracted by the government, but the message has not penetrated corporate bureaucracy yet. So people are still making us change our passwords. Anyway, you will see it frequently quoted as a recommendation, but I never understood it, and neither did anybody else, and they took it back. Anyway, so you can then try to talk to them and try to convince them to do something better, or you can see if they have a compensating control to make up for whatever you don't like about what they're doing. Then there's onboarding. So when you begin a relationship with a third party, just like when you hire employees, there ought to be an onboarding process where you perform due diligence. You do background checks, you check the resume on employees, and you do similar things with companies. You make some reasonable effort to determine if this is a reputable company with reasonable practices that you should that will fit within your risk profile. So you check your language. Do they really have controls? Do they have vulnerability management? So on. Do we have the right to audit them? And so on. You can see, and of course there may be restrictions on outsourcing, like you may be working with data where you're not allowed to send it out of the country. And of course, lately, now that we have huge embargoes against Russia, all kinds of companies had to pull back from Russia because it's no longer legal to do business with Russia and outsource things. That's why, so, that sort of thing is also an issue. So if you have an incident, now of course you've got a problem. If the incident involves the third party, then you can't just drive down and look at their servers and logs and everything. It's not really clear how much data you can get from them, and how do you really know whether they thoroughly cleaned the incident off. There's a major company, I forget the name, that just had one of these recently. They just had a security incident, and they've been just sort of lying and covering it up for about a month. And every few days, more scary things leak out, showing they really did have a lot of the customers' data stolen. That tends to happen, that third parties have security problems, and they do not respond well to them, and they do not communicate well about it. And then you're left in the miserable position of not knowing how much of your data is stolen and not knowing what you can do. So, all right. Then you have internal partnerships inside your company with other divisions in your company. So these are real important. If you can have good relations between the security team and the other divisions in the company, of course, it works much better. And we talked about this all through this course. Instead of being a hostile force blocking progress of your company by denying what they need to do, you should be a partner helping your company helping the divisions accomplish their goals. So you should have security liaisons, and you have to make sure they do have training and enough time allocated to go understand what the other divisions are doing and fit into it. So your legal department has to handle legal risk, and you can help with security clauses and assessment before signing a contract. Didn't Apple compartmentalize so no one knew what anyone else was doing? I was not aware of that at Apple. If so, that would seem like a bad idea. It seems like your security team, just like your lawyer, has to know what everybody is doing. Even if you have compartmentalization for other reasons, remember the old rule was you tell your doctor and your lawyer everything. That's why those people have confidentiality rules where they won't tell anybody else, because you have to be able to tell them everything. And it would seem to me like the same would apply to your security team. Human resources, of course. By the way, up here I wanted to say it would be really good to be with your legal so that before they sign a contract with a company, you get a chance to do some security assessment and warn them if the company they're about to sign a contract with has known security problems. Human resources, of course, you've got background checks, non-disclosure agreements, and security awareness training. So security has some contribution to make there. And, of course, the human resource information systems they're using to keep track of everybody, payroll and social security numbers and everything, should be monitored by the security department to make sure that it's sufficiently secure. And when you have internal transfers, when you move people from one division to another as they get transferred and promoted in the company, one common mistake is they have accumulation of privileges. They have keys and passwords and stuff at one job level, and when they move to another role, they just get more privileges added on without subtracting the old ones, and that's something that should be handled better. And your information systems, your security people should be able to make sure that doesn't happen, that when you move to the new role, you lose the old privileges. I know at the college, you always can get more keys. Nobody ever collects your old keys, so the old teachers just have a lot of keys they can get in every room, which is the accumulation of privileges you're trying to prevent here. And then offboarding, this is a huge issue. When people leave, they almost always steal confidential company material. I had a visitor to the class who one of his jobs had been he would search the leaving people, and he said he never failed to find the company data they were trying to smuggle out. Everybody does, apparently. And so this is a problem. So it's a security issue, an IT issue. One thing you have to do is immediately terminate their access rights on the system. So especially if it's a hostile firing, they can't execute revenge and sabotage on the system. Then collect all the assets, sign various agreements like non-disclosure, and in non-California states, non-compete. Those are not legal here. I've had some people tell me they were forced to sign them here, but I've been told they will not take effect in court. And then, of course, your training, your investigations for HR issues where you're considering punishing or firing somebody. You may have security issues like forensics to get the evidence. And when you're disciplining people, there may be issues here with security, helping to gather the proof to justify these things. And facilities, maintaining the buildings and the power and such. They've got physical access control, your surveillance systems, security guards, personnel safety, and there are these interact with the other security systems, so a security team should be involved in all that. And of course, IT, the main one everyone thinks about. Your firewall, IDS, spam filters, patching, all that stuff is, of course, the bread and butter of network security. System monitoring and your third-party connections, all these things, of course, should involve your security team. And your product development. If you manufacture something, like software, for example, then it would really be a good idea to include the security tests right from the beginning. I heard some statements saying that if you patch something in the earliest stages of design, that's cheap. If you have to patch it after you've designed it, that costs 10 times more. And if you have to patch it after you've sold it to customers and put out patches, that costs 10 times more again. So it's 100 times more expensive to patch things like with the Microsoft monthly updates than it would have been to actually fix it when you were first having the idea. So, it's much better to consider security all along. Open source software is often a problem. The supply chain, more and more these days, you're using open source software and it's using libraries, and some of those are not safe. And developers. This is what I'm doing now for some of my corporate clients, is trying to train developers to write more secure code. This is a new field. People have talked about it for years. It has not been done. People are just in the beginning stages of figuring out how to train developers to write more secure code. It is a fairly new process in its infancy. And of course, it would be nice to help with the due diligence for purchases. At Rapid7, I remember H.D. Moore, the man that wrote Metasploit, writes blogs about how at that company they trusted him enough, so every time they wanted to buy something, like some new switches, some new routers, they would let him have it, and he would do a thorough pen test on it and find out what its weaknesses are and tell them whether it's worth buying or not. And many companies, of course, do not have that skill, but he did, and it would be nice to do some reasonable due diligence before buying things to make sure you're not buying a defective or insecure product. And finance, of course, one thing you can do is go to accounts payable and find out. This is one way to find out what third-party services are in use. It's not the best way, but I remember years ago they said, if you people think you're not using Amazon Cloud, just look at your finance and see how much money you're paying to Amazon. Do you really think those people are buying that many books? Departments of your company are buying Amazon Cloud machines, and you might not know it. And so if you don't have the ability to intercept it earlier, then you can at least go to accounts payable to find out who's paying for cloud services and stuff, and just find out what people are doing. Of course, by that time, they're already using that stuff, and you might already be a problem. It would have been better to control that relationship earlier, but this is better than nothing. All right, and so all your business unit managers should understand how whatever they're doing interacts with the security team, and hopefully trust the security team to help them do it better, and not just see them as another painful source of irritating work like filling out compliance documents and such. And you have your affiliates and key business partners. Like half of all security breaches come from outside the company. I remember maybe 6 or 7 years ago, there was a protest in San Francisco, and BART had just put in special devices to allow you to have cell phone service on the trains. And the people were protesting and blocking the BART stations, so they turned off those devices so the protesters couldn't use their phones on the trains to try to stop the protesters from organizing, and people got very, very upset. And so a bunch of them decided to hack BART. And they couldn't hack BART, but they hacked some third-party company called GoBART that would sell you BART tickets. And they had some customer data, and they stole that customer data and published it, and said, there, BART has been hacked. And it wasn't really BART that got hacked, but it was a partner, and because of the partnership agreement, that partner did have some information about people that were also customers of BART, so it managed to humiliate BART even though it wasn't them getting hacked. And this is very often the case, that your business partners are the problem. Yeah, they sold BART staff PI. Yeah, it could have been, yeah. And so I'm not even sure it was ever from BART Systems. These people were buying BART tickets at a third party, so they had their names and credit card numbers, but it's not clear that BART ever even had that information. But in the public eye, it was a humiliation of BART, so it served as like a political statement and an embarrassment for BART. And by the way, I'm not sure what you could do about that. I mean, if you have any product for sale, other people want to sell it, you don't know how they're securing it. Anyway, so let's take a look at the other Kahoot. They've clearly developed a few new musics. Few new musics. I guess they must be making some money so they can pay for new music. Anyway. Could be that too. All right. That's right. Maybe they went offshore and pirated some music. Anyway. All right. So, all right. All right. So a vendor is SOC 2 compliant. What assessment is that? That's an external attestation. Good. All right. All right. So what contractual provision requires verification of resumes? Employee integrity. I remember this happened to Uber. Some Uber drivers started attacking their people they were giving rides to, and then it came out that Uber had not really been checking the resumes and stuff like they should have. So, or checking their criminal history or something like that. Anyway. All right. So what internal partnership prevents accumulation of privileges? Yeah, that's your partnership with HR. HR knows when somebody moves from one job role to another, and if security has partnered with them, they can then correctly adjust the permissions and such. All right, and what internal partnership would implement security by design? All right, that's product development. Good. All right. All right. All right. All two-time winners.